Hi there, my name's Ian Harris, and I'm partnering with Katie Larson and Bennett Kidiche for Hackahouse 2020 in the finance category. Our project is called ADU West. So we have two main goals with ADU West, and that is to include minority communities that are highly underrepresented in the ADU sector and to increase ADU units along the west side of Salt Lake City, thereby alleviating the issue of affordable housing. So something that really spurred our project was these racial disparities that we noticed between the west side of Salt Lake City and the east side of Salt Lake City. So most Salt Lake residents know that the east side tends to be very monocultural, very white, middle class to upper class, whereas the west side of Salt Lake City tends to be very diverse, but it has a very strong Hispanic community, and it tends to be a bit more working class. So one of the reasons why this is such an issue is because there's a massive wealth and income gap between white people and Hispanic people in our country. So you can see that on average, white people have an average wealth of $171,000, whereas Hispanic people tend to have a wealth of $21,000. That's a huge gap, and the income gap is equally troubling. So in addition to this, there is also a correlation between the East and West Divide and the disparity between ADU units being constructed in Salt Lake City. So on the east side of Salt Lake City, which comprises districts 3 through 7, there were 29 ADUs constructed in 2019, and those are just official units that were kind of sanctioned and went through the city process. Whereas on the west side of Salt Lake City, there are 4 ADU units that were constructed in 2019. That is such an issue because ADU units are a great tool to both alleviate affordable housing while also building wealth and income at the same time. So what is our plan to address this issue? So number one, we want to partner. Number two, we want to construct. Number three, we want to rent. And number four, we want to transfer. And I'll go into detail on those right now. So number one, partner. We want to partner with homeowners in the Salt Lake City West Side to develop an ADU on their property. And we would do that through some sort of contractual agreement to utilize a portion of their property as an ADU unit. In Salt Lake City, thankfully, you can reasonably develop an ADU on any property as long as it is zoned for housing. That's why we want to start here in Salt Lake City and maybe look at expanding to other places in the region later on. Number two, construction. We want to work with prospective partners to construct an ADU unit on the homeowner's property. So that might include a bank for financing, an architect, or an ADU builder. Sometimes those are one and the same. And then, of course, the homeowner and whatever sort of legal or financial framework they've developed their property to. The cost of an ADU unit on average, which we found, is 120 to 200,000. That's based on evidence in Salt Lake City and in other comparable metro areas in the United States. So number three, we want to rent out this unit. So once constructed, ADU West, which is us, would begin the renting process. We would rent out the property for 5 to 10 years, depending on the costs that we accumulated with the property, and we would rent at an affordable rate until the ADU is paid off with interest. We would rent out this property with the intention of providing affordable housing for low-income individuals. That's our main target here. And then lastly, we would transfer the control of the ADU unit to the homeowner once we paid off the property with interest. So the owner, without any sort of increased cost or extra cost, can then choose to do with it whatever they want. They could rent out the ADU unit as affordable housing, which we think there would be a strong incentive to do because they would qualify for a low-income housing tax credit. They could also choose to house family members with that ADU unit. That could be like a grandma or a grandpa that previously had only been living in a single bedroom and now they would have their own house basically. Or they could choose to sell their property with the increased value that the ADU unit provides, which would give the homeowner an increased amount of wealth. So these are our intended outcomes. We want to address ADU disparities on the west side of Salt Lake City, provide affordable housing for individuals on Salt Lake City's west side as well. We also want to increase the overall ADU stock in Salt Lake City, and we want to alleviate racial disparities in wealth and income as they pertain to housing in Salt Lake City. So with that, thank you so much for viewing our presentation. If you look at the PowerPoint file, there are a few additional slides beyond this, our appendix that explains the financials, and a source page that lists all of our sources that we use for our project. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening, and happy Hack a House.